What is the most hilarious historical fact you know? Julius Caesar had a letter dispatched via messenger while the Senate was in session. Convinced he was sending a message to his collaborators, Senator Cato the Younger demanded that the letter be read in open session to be entered into the annals of the Senate forever. Caesar allowed the letter to be read, and thus the most filthy love letter Caesar had written to his lover at the time, Cato's half-sister Servilia, got entered into historical record forever. A burn so big, people still talk about it 2,100 years later. Brazil and France almost went to war because they had a disagreement about lobsters. The event is known as the Lobster War. France thought lobsters swim, therefore they were above Brazilian soil and could be fished by any vessel, and Brazil thought lobsters crawled on the ocean's floor, therefore are Brazilian property. Brazil's foreign affairs minister had this to say about it: "The attitude of France is inadmissible, and our government will not retreat. The lobster will not be caught." It ended when they agreed that actually lobsters don't crawl nor swim, they leap. Many of the streets in Monterey, California are named after prostitutes. The local madam kept the town out of bankruptcy on a few conditions and named the streets after her favorite workers. It has been all over Reddit forever, but the fact that Andrew Jackson's pet parrot was ejected from Jackson's funeral for swearing will never not make me giggle. Notorious pirate hunter Benjamin Hornigold once attacked a ship just to steal all of the crew members' hats. His men had gotten drunk and lost their hats during a party the night before and decided to board a ship to get replacements. Ben Franklin used to leak government secrets while drunk to get laid. It got to the point he had to be monitored outside of session. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it. So he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late because they were still using the Julian calendar in 1904. Seriously, this needs to be a movie. If this sounds familiar, I'm reposting myself. In Pompeii they molded D shapes into the cobblestone roads to point the way to the brothel. Germany once attempted to pass off one of their naval ships as an English ship to sneak up on the coast of England and attack. The first ship Germany encountered was the ship they disguised themselves as. Stalin tried to use moose in battle, like horses. Shockingly, he did not succeed. Apparently not true. I can't seem to find the source where I originally read this from. My bad. Australia's 17th Prime Minister went swimming in the ocean one day and never came back, presumed drowned. In honor of his memory, in typical Australian fashion, we named a swimming pool after him. Queen Catherine Ayaka Catherine the Great of Russia was a massive nymphomaniac. She had sex so often that when she died, the French spread an epic rumor about her. So basically they said that she had a machine constructed that consisted of many different ropes and pulleys, and was built right over top of her bed. This device was designed to raise and lower a horse so that she could use the horse to pleasure herself. One day the device broke and the horse fell and crushed her, effectively killing her, all because she wanted a horse cock. This is completely bullet. She died from old age and being sick. But the French didn't like her and everybody knew that she was an info, so they believed the French for years. My AP European history teacher told my entire class this in 10th grade. And it was a very memorable story that I will remember forever. Ducking Frenchies. JK, I hold no resentment against them. Just think it's funny. Thanks to the Dollar Podcast for this. But the Willie D, which was a US Navy destroyer during World War II. Amongst its exploits, the ship dragged its anchor along several ships when leaving port, fired its 5-inch gun at their own base, which landed in the base commander's yard during a dinner party, accidentally launched a torpedo at the battleship Iowa, which was transporting the President of the United States, and was eventually sunk by a Japanese kamikaze plane that was shot down and sunk, then detonated under the Willie D. In 897, the former Pope, who had been dead for 7 months, was dug up and put on trial for perjury and heresy. He was convicted. Galileo got persecuted because he personally dissed the Pope. Initially, the Catholic Church didn't mind that much about Galileo's heliocentric model, telling him to only assert it as a model instead of as fact. It was only after writing the philosophical book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, where he put Pope Urban VI's views and arguments into the mouth of the layman character, Simplicio, that the church took it personally. Miracle Mike is a chicken in the 1950s, I think, that was headless. He went on tour and he is from Colorado. He could be fed by using a dropper and little seeds. Eventually, he died because he suffocated on some food, or something. His death is controversial. Caesar once got kidnapped by pirates, was outraged when he found out the ransom they were asking was too low and threw a tantrum and made them raise it. Charondas was a celebrated lawmaker in Catania, in present-day Sicily. Diodorus Siculus stated that Charondas issued a law that anyone who brought weapons into the assembly must be put to death. Charondas ran to the assembly one day because he was being ambushed and he wanted help. Unfortunately, he still had a sword still attached to himself, so in order to uphold his own law, he committed suicide. During World War II, New Zealand had sent all of its forces to Europe, Africa to battle the Germans, so when Japan entered the war, NZ felt a lot more vulnerable, seeing as it practically had no real defenses to throw back an invasion. Seeing as the war was being fought on the other side of the planet, NZ was extra worried as we had no tanks in NZ as we didn't produce any at this time. Our response was to develop a homemade tank built on top of an old tractor chassis. The end product was a hilariously slow, underarmed, unmaneuverable tank that wasn't going to stop any enemy force. When the tank was unveiled by its creator Bob Semple, Parliament laughed at him, to which he responded, "Well, I don't see you guys coming up with anything better." In the end, the Semple tank never saw combat and the tanks were converted back into tractors as it was thought they would help the war effort better that way. Saying that though, Japan never did invade NZ, so maybe the Semple tank did its job so good it scared Japan away. There was an actual judge at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia to process unruly Eagles fans that were arrested during football games. British Navy in World War I had battleships disguised as passenger and merchant ships with some of the sailors cross-dressing as women. This was to entice German U-boats to surface, as they would frequently attack unarmed and unescorted merchant ships. Part of Boston was once devastated by a flood of molasses. You could say it was a sticky situation. San Francisco, California, once had an emperor. I don't know if this counts since it's a law in UK, but something happened that caused this law to be passed. More than as of 1313, it has been illegal to enter the Houses of Parliament wearing a suit of armor. In the 1920s, radium had recently been discovered, and it was seen similarly to how titanium is seen now. People back then didn't know that radiation was harmful. In fact, many thought it was healthy. Just like today, many radium branded products back then quite fortunately contained no such radium. Some unfortunately did. Some were in practicum harmless, such as watches that had radium coated paint that glowed in the dark. The production of these, however, didn't last too long, as the women who painted these watches would lick the brush to get them to a fine point. You can see where that went. Other companies had products that were all in all quite disturbing. One such company thought it would be a good idea to make a little pouch for men to store a fair amount of radium right up against their reproductive organs. Again, you can see where that went. Edit. Thanks for so many upvotes, you kind people. I was told in high school history that President Taft got stuck in a bathtub and they had to use butter to get him out. Corporal Wojtek the soldier bear served in the Polish army in World War II. Yes, a Syrian brown bear. He saw combat, enjoyed smoking, drinking, and coffee in the morning. When soldiers were cold, he would sleep with them to keep them warm. Originally known as Private Wojtek, he was promoted to corporal after his admirable service in the Battle of Monte Cassino. A very seldom mentioned fact about Louis Riel, leader of the Métis Nation and most written about man in Canadian history, is that he was so devoted to his resistance movement that he sold everything he owned to get more ammunition for his soldiers. This included his clothing. When he was finally captured in Batoche, he was stark naked. No one really knows how long he'd been running around like that, since his soldiers had been shooting nails and wood out of their guns for quite a while before his capture. But the man probably had schizophrenia, and this might have just been considered normal real behavior. Anyways, he was given a coat by one of the NW mountain police officers that took him in. A few decades later, someone decided to build a statue of this scene. Riel defeated with nothing but an overcoat on. I've never been able to find a picture of the actual statue, but it stood in Regina, Saskatchewan for years. One day, someone's child got a little too close to it, looked up the coat, and saw it was anatomically correct under the coat. The child ran off to tell their parents what they saw. The parents complained to the city, and the statue was taken down, and I have no bloody idea where it is today, despite days of googling and calling around to try and find it, or just a picture of it for a paper I was writing. Where the hell is the naked statue of Louis Riel? Someone please tell me. I need to see it once in my life. I don't remember specifics, but a lord in England way back, 1600s, wanted his people to start growing potatoes. The locals scoffed at the idea, so the lord started his own potato patch and started telling people how expensive and valuable they were. He had guards posted around his potato garden. However, he told the guards that if people snuck in at night, they were to look the other way. Through this method, the people started growing potatoes, and when the bad times came, they had a crop that could sustain them. Once upon a time, during the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, the country of Liechtenstein sent its army, all of 80 men, to guard a pass between Austria and Italy. This pretty much amounted to sitting around drinking, playing cards, and enjoying the view. However, when the time came for the army to march home, 81 men returned to Liechtenstein, because not only did they suffer no casualties, but at some point they managed to collect an Italian defector. Edit. PS Happy Cake Day. The fact that Cleopatra was able to be snuck into a building in a carpet, like it would have looked misformed as hell, and they didn't even check it. For security guards, they did a pretty crappy job. In 1266, a pig was trailed for murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Caligula had a house built for his horse and may have even made him a senator. In World War II, after the Nazis conquered France, French saboteurs disabled the Eiffel Tower's elevator. When Hitler came to go up in it and found the lift wouldn't work, he just gave up. Hitler may have conquered France, but he couldn't conquer the Eiffel Tower. Not only funny, but one of the biggest docu moments in history. Italy fought a war over a bucket. There are approximately 1,010,300 words in the English language, but I could never string enough words together to properly express how much I want to hit you with a chair. Alexander Hamilton to Thomas Jefferson. The first pharaoh of Egypt, Menes, started the Egyptian Empire, created the first dynasty, lived for 60 years, only to get killed by a ducking hippopotamus. TLDR, Egyptian pharaoh gets killed by a hippo lol. Andrew Jackson shared a cup of coffee, illegally imported, with Jean Lafitte and his crew one night during the New Orleans campaign, even after he basically called him and his men lawless savages. He was exhausted from dysentery. Every battle he fought in, he did so from horseback. Reason being, he was suffering from severe diarrhea and refused to dismount his horse for fear of hurting himself. Also, many of Jean Lafitte's men didn't fight in any climactic battle. They'd wait on the outskirts of the enemy camps, wait for one or two guys to walk out into the brush to relieve themselves, and come out of the mud and slit their throats. Andrew Jackson learned this when he almost pissed right on one of their heads when he first arrived. I live 3 blocks away from the ruins of the field hospital where General Packham died. Thought I'd share these with you all. Battle of New Orleans wasn't even fought in New Orleans. Look up my hometown of Chalmette. Peter the Great had his wife's lover executed and ordered to put his head in a bottle with alcohol. The woman should keep that bottle in her bedroom. Darwin spent 3 days on the ship trying to figure out how to use a hammock when he went to the Galapagos Islands. He kept trying to get in legs first. Ultimately he had to pull it taut enough that it was totally flat and didn't swing. Also, he had no knowledge of how to send samples back to England and just randomly shoved dead animals into boxes. Often the scientist who received them couldn't even tell what the hell the samples were. Finally, he accidentally ate a bird that he'd specifically been on the lookout for. And once he realized, he boxed up the head and wings and sent those back. When Europeans first got access to tobacco, they thought it had amazing medicinal qualities. Among many other things, they thought they could revive an unconscious or comatose person by sticking a tube or pipe up the unconscious person's ass and blowing tobacco smoke into it. This obviously didn't work. Not even a little bit. But it did give us the expression to blow smoke up one's ass, which means a placating action that doesn't actually help in any way. The first defenestration of Prague, a Hussite priest was leading his congregation on a procession through the streets of Prague. Someone threw a rock from the window of the nearby town hall building, which allegedly hit the priest. This turned the congregation into an angry mob, which stormed the town hall building and threw 7 members of the town council out of the building's tower window, killing them. Charles II of Spain was unbelievably inbred. After centuries of inbreeding, the Spanish line of Habsburg was dying off due to a curse, of course. No one knew it at the time, but all the deformities present were a result of the inbreeding. A few quick facts about Charles II. He had horrible health his entire life. He was unable to speak until age 4. He was unable to walk until age 8. His jaw was so malformed he struggled to eat and speak. His bottom teeth protruded noticeably from his top. He would constantly drool as he could not keep his mouth closed. He was never educated out of the fear the stress would be too much on his brain. He had no rules and often was covered in filth. He was believed to be infertile due to his deformities. He ordered that his deceased relatives be dug up so he could look at their remains. The autopsy of him is even stranger. No blood. Tiny heart size of a nut. His lungs corroded and shriveled. Intestines rotten. A single black testicle. Head full of water. The wonders of keeping it in the family. Didn't Caligula start a war with the ocean? Ancient China and ancient Greece fought a war over horses. China was jealous of Greek horses because they were big and strong while China's were small and weak. China also saw horses as holy animals, I believe. Fun times, the ancient era. That one Finnish soldier who got separated from his squad, only carrying the emergency methamphetamines. He took like 30 of them and then went on a one-man rampage for 2 weeks, giving the Soviet soldier quite some nightmares. He traveled 400 kilometers, all on skis. Got hit by a landmine and only ate pinabeds and a Siberian jay raw. When he was found, his heart was beating at 200 BPM and his weight had dropped to 43 kilograms. If you want to look him up, his name is Amo Koivunen. Up until 1945, every single person in New York City was required to move on the same day. The 1st of May was called Moving Day, and everyone in Nick was legally required to move their id out of their apartment house and find a new one. Movers charged outrageous prices and apartments all raised their rents every year because they could get away with it. People literally had to move or face legal consequences. Imagine how stressful moving from one apartment to another is. Now imagine if every other person at every apartment complex in your city was also moving on the same day. Learned about this from the podcast The Dollop, episode number 362. George of Clarence tried to take the throne from Edward IV of England, his elder brother. He failed, and like kings after he needed to execute the traitor. So the story goes their shared mother begged mercy, so Edward ended up allowing his brother George to choose his own execution. He chose to be drowned in Malmsey wine. Pope Gregory IV declared war on black cats in Europe, mentioning they are sworn in by Satan. In the end, that led to an increase of plague-carried rats and more dead people. I forget the specific country. A European army was pursuing another European army. The army split around a mountain range in pursuit. They then attacked themselves, successfully destroying their own army. Benjamin Franklin was really kinky and often had journal entries written about his escapades. Weeks after an assassination attempt, Ronald Reagan was giving a speech when a balloon exploded. He looked up and immediately said "missed me," then continued speaking. In World War I, Liechtenstein's army went to war 80 men and came back with 81. A small business called Harrods in a small town in New Zealand was sued by the big British company Harrods. In response, the town renamed itself Harrodsville and all the businesses in the town renamed themselves Harrods. There was once 3 popes, who all excommunicated the other 2. Legend has it that during the Napoleonic Wars of the early 19th century, a shipwrecked monkey was hanged by the people of Hartlepool, believing him to be a French spy. To this day, people from Hartlepool are affectionately known as os monkey hangers. A French ship was spotted floundering and sinking off the Hartlepool coast. Suspicious of enemy ships and nervous of possible invasion, the good folk of Hartlepool rushed down to the beach, where amongst the wreckage of the ship they found the only survivor, the ship's monkey, which was apparently dressed in a miniature military style uniform. Hartlepool is a long way from France and most of the populace had never met, or even seen, a Frenchman. Some satirical cartoons of the time pictured the French as monkey-like creatures with tails and claws. So perhaps the locals could be forgiven for deciding that the monkey, in its uniform, must be a Frenchman, and a French spy at that. There was a trial to ascertain whether the monkey was guilty of spying or not. However, not unsurprisingly, the monkey was unable to answer any of the court's questions and was found guilty. The townsfolk then dragged him into the town square and hanged him. In the late 1800s, my hometown was going through their prohibition phase. There were 2 bars that wouldn't close at all. Eventually the women of the town got tired of the bars and decided to get rid of them. They met up outside of the schoolhouse and started to march towards the bars. They burned down both of them and destroyed hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise. They were all charged with $1 fine for illegal entering. In 1775, British General Sir Henry Clinton was sent to the American colonies alongside Generals Howe and Burgoyne. During the entire 6-week voyage, not once did Clinton speak with the other 2 generals. On arrival he noted this in his diary, writing, "I'm a shite." Timothy Dexter was an idiot with enough luck to beggar disbelief. He dropped out of school to work on his family's farm. Upon reaching adulthood, he married upward, specifically a rich widow named Elizabeth Frothingham. A bit later, this funny little thing called the American Revolution came to an end. Not so well known is that during the war, the burgeoning US had been using a temporary note to pay most of the army, which became useless almost overnight. Many rich people began buying these notes off of the army veterans, because they gave said rich people a country and all that, but often for pennies on the dollar or less. Timothy decided to follow suit, and he bought literal boatloads of the bad notes, using most of the fortune his wife had on the notes. This should have bankrupted Timothy, but then the new US decided to buy the notes at face value. This made him much richer, being a bit of an ass. Other nobles of the day suggested Timothy send warming pans to the Caribbean. Warming pans are specially designed heating devices that effectively look like pans with really long handles. They are designed to heat beds for cold climates, specifically not something really describing the Caribbean. He again managed to make a profit on these as, while bad for the beds of the Caribbean, they made excellent molasses spoons, allowing Timothy to again steal his whole stock. He would later have success rounding up stray cats, later sold countering a rat problem in the south, and even managed to sell coal to a place known for mining coal. A workers' strike happened just before the ship arrived.